Seaside Cliffs Resort. Late October. The ocean breeze carries the scent of white roses and old money stinging my eyes like smoke. My name is Beatrice Hamilton, and I am standing in the shadows of a coronation I wasn't invited to. Inside, under the glow of crystal chandeliers, my family is toasting to a legacy built on a lie they forced me to swallow 3 years ago. They think I am the broken daughter, the liability they paid to disappear. They have no idea I'm walking through those doors not to beg for a seat, but to finally set the record straight. Tonight, the silence ends. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The gravel crunching under the tires of the Bentleys and Porsches sounded like grinding teeth. I stood in the shadows of the oversized portico at the Seaside Cliffs Resort, watching the people I grew up with hand their keys to valets who looked terrified to scratch the paint. The air smelled of salt spray, expensive cologne, and the distinct cloying scent of white roses, thousands of them. Inside, the string quartet was already playing something classical and undoubtedly expensive, a melody that floated out to where I stood shivering in my coat. I wasn't cold because of the ocean breeze. I was cold because I was staring at a world that had spent the last 3 years trying to convince everyone, including me, that I didn't exist. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I didn't need to look to know who it was, but I looked anyway. The contact name was just Mother. No emojis, no mom, just the title she wore like a rank in the military. The message was brief. Don't come. You don't belong to this family anymore. Don't make a scene. I stared at the screen until the backlight timed out, leaving me in the dark again. Most people would read a text like that and cry. Most people would get back in their car, drive home, and sob into a pillow about being rejected. But I didn't cry. I hadn't cried over the Hamiltons since I was 22. The worst part about that text wasn't the cruelty. The worst part was that she meant it. To Elaine and Robert Hamilton, family wasn't about blood or loyalty or love. It was a corporation, and I was the liability they had liquidated. I watched a couple I'd known since kindergarten walk through the double doors. They were laughing, holding hands, completely unaware that the daughter of the host was standing 30 feet away, hidden by a pillar. They probably thought I was in rehab, or jail, or dead. That was the narrative my parents had spun. Wasn't it? I was the difficult one, the unstable one, the one who couldn't handle the pressure of the Hamilton legacy. It was a brilliant lie because it covered up the much uglier truth. I wasn't difficult. I was just the only one who refused to be complicit. Growing up in the Hamilton house was like living on a stage set. Everything was scripted. My father, Robert, was the director, a man whose ego required constant feeding. He was a provider, a word he used as a weapon. If he paid for your dinner, he owned your opinion. If he paid for your college, he owned your future. My mother, Elaine, was the PR manager. Her job wasn't to love us. It was to ensure we looked lovable to the outside world. And then there was Bryce, the golden boy, the groom. Tonight was his coronation. I looked up at the banners fluttering from the balconies. Bryce and Samantha. It looked like a merger announcement. I'd heard the wedding cost upwards of $300,000. It was a spectacle of American status culture, the coastal resort, the imported flowers, the guest list padded with local politicians and business rivals my father wanted to impress. It wasn't a celebration of love. It was a statement of dominance. And my exclusion from it was the punctuation mark at the end of that statement. The rift hadn't started with a fight. It started with a silence. 3 years ago, Bryce had called me at 2:00 a.m., slurring his words, panic rising in his voice like bile. He'd hit something. Or someone. He wasn't sure. He was driving Dad's vintage Mercedes, the one he wasn't supposed to touch, and he was wasted. When I got to the scene, the car was in a ditch, the bumper smashed. Thank God he hadn't killed anyone. He'd taken out a row of mailboxes and a utility pole, but the police were coming. My parents arrived before the cops did. I expected them to be furious at Bryce. Instead, they turned to me. You were driving, my father had said. It wasn't a question. I wasn't driving, I'd replied, stunned. I was in bed. Beatrice, my mother had said, her voice dropping to that terrifyingly calm register she used when she was negotiating a discount. Bryce has a future. He has the internship. This will ruin him. You're finding yourself. A DUI won't stick to you the way it will stick to him. We'll pay for the lawyer. We'll pay for everything. Just get in the driver's seat. They wanted me to take the fall. They wanted me to absorb the criminal record, the shame, and the legal consequences so Bryce could remain pristine. And when I refused, when I handed the keys back to my father and walked away, as the sirens wailed in the distance, that was it. That was the betrayal. I didn't just say no, I broke the cardinal rule of the Hamilton family. Protect the image at all costs. They managed to bribe and lawyer their way out of it for Bryce anyway, but they never forgave me for not lying down on the tracks for him. I hadn't even received an invitation to this wedding. I found out it was happening today because a cousin I barely speak to posted a photo of her dress on Instagram with the caption, "Wedding ready, #Hamilton legacy." That was the sting. It wasn't just that they didn't invite me, it was that they had successfully erased me. I heard the whispers from the community. My parents told people I was struggling with mental health issues and had chosen to distance myself. They painted me as the prodigal daughter who spat in their faces rather than the woman who refused to commit a felony for her brother. But there was one thing they didn't know, one variable they hadn't accounted for in their perfect calculations: Noah. I shifted my weight, glancing at the sleek black sedan pulling up to the valet stand. Noah Sterling wasn't inside it. He had arrived earlier separately, but seeing the car reminded me of him. We met 18 months ago at a legal aid clinic. I was volunteering on the finance side, helping low-income families sort through debt, and he was there offering pro bono corporate counsel for nonprofits. He was quiet, disciplined, and intensely private. He wore hoodies and jeans and drove a beat-up Volvo to the clinic. It took me 3 months of dating him to realize that Noah from the clinic was actually Noah Sterling, CEO of Sterling Dynamics, a tech logistics firm that had just cracked the Fortune 500. My father would have killed to get a meeting with Noah. Bryce would have tried to leverage the connection for a job. But I never told them. I never told anyone. I didn't want Noah to be a trophy. I didn't want my family to look at him and see a wallet or a ladder. I wanted something that was just mine. Noah knew about my family. He knew the ugly, unvarnished truth because I told him everything, but he had never met them. Until tonight. He was inside right now. He had been invited not as a boyfriend, but as a valued industry partner by the bride's father. When he got the invitation, he asked me if I wanted him to decline. "I don't have to go," he'd said, sitting at my kitchen counter, watching me with those steady dark eyes. "I don't want to be in a room with people who treat you like that." "Go," I had told him. "I'm not going to be the reason you insult a business contact." "I'm not going without you," he countered. "I'm not invited, Noah." "Then we make a plan." But standing here now, looking at the golden light spilling out of the ballroom, I realized this wasn't about a plan. It wasn't about revenge. If I walked away now, if I let that text message from my mother stop me, I was proving them right. I was proving that I was the shameful secret, the one who belonged in the dark. I thought about the years of being told I was too sensitive, too loud, too difficult. I thought about Bryce, who smirked while I took the blame for his broken vases and bad grades, and who almost let me take the blame for his drunk driving. I wasn't here to burn the place down. I wasn't here to scream or throw wine or make the scene my mother was so terrified of. I was here to do something much more dangerous. I was going to walk into that room, head high, sober, successful, and calm. I was going to let them see me. The valet looked at me confused. "Miss, are you with the wedding?" I looked at the phone in my hand one last time, then slid it into my purse. I smoothed the front of my dress, a deep emerald silk that I bought with my own money, earned from my own job in a life I built without a cent of Hamilton cash. "Yes," I said, my voice steady, surprising even myself. "I'm the groom's sister." The valet's eyes widened slightly, realizing he should have recognized the name, or perhaps noticing the resemblance I tried so hard to hide. He stepped back. I walked toward the double doors. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my hands were still. I wasn't there to crash a wedding. I was there to stop letting them write my story. I pushed the doors open and stepped into the light. The foyer of the ballroom was an assault of crystal and marble. A massive chandelier, probably worth more than the house I rented, hung precariously overhead, scattering light across the polished floors. I walked toward the check-in table where a young woman with a headset and a sleek tablet was managing the gatekeeping. I recognized her immediately. It was Mrs. Gable's daughter Sarah, a girl I used to babysit 10 years ago. She looked up, her professional smile firmly in place, ready to welcome a donor or a dignitary. Then she saw me. The smile didn't just drop, it evaporated. "Name?" she asked, though her voice wavered. She knew exactly who I was. "Beatrice Hamilton," I said. Sarah tapped on her tablet, her fingers moving with a frantic energy that betrayed her anxiety. She scrolled down, then up, then down again. Beatrice, I don't have you on the list. I have the grandparents, the cousins from Vermont, the board members." She looked up at me, her eyes darting to the security guard standing 10 feet away. "Your mother gave me the final manifest this morning. She said it was complete." "I'm sure it was an oversight." I lied. We both knew it wasn't. "B, please," she whispered, leaning over the table, dropping the formality. "Don't make me call them over. Your mom was very specific about uninvited guests." "I just need 5 minutes, Sarah. I'm not staying for dinner. I just want to wish my brother well." My voice was calm, contrasting the pounding in my ears. This was the first hurdle, the gatekeeper. If I screamed, I was the crazy sister. If I cried, I was the broken victim. I had to be the one thing they feared most reasonable. Sarah hesitated. She looked at the security guard, then back at me. She remembered the nights I helped her with her algebra homework while my parents were out at galas. She remembered who I actually was, not the caricature my parents had painted. 5 minutes, she murmured. "But if she sees you, I'm saying you slipped past me." "Deal." I walked past the velvet rope. The ballroom was cavernous, transformed into a white and gold palace. Round tables were set with towering floral centerpieces that blocked lines of sight, a tactical advantage. I moved toward the periphery near the bar, trying to get my bearings. The room was filling up with the right kind of people. Men in tuxedos discussing market volatility. Women in gowns that cost a year of tuition discussing the venue. I felt the familiar itch of inadequacy, that old programmed reflex to shrink, to apologize for taking up space. I forced myself to take a breath, holding it until the feeling passed. "You have a lot of nerve." The voice came from my left. I didn't flinch. I turned slowly to see my mother, Elaine. She looked immaculate in silver silk, her hair sprayed into a helmet of perfection. But her eyes were hard, 2 pieces of flint striking sparks. She wasn't looking at me. She was scanning the room to see if anyone was watching us. She was smiling, a tight rictus grin that would look pleasant from a distance, but looked like a snarl up close. "Hello, Mother. You look lovely." "Get out," she hissed through her teeth, still smiling at a passing waiter. "You don't get to show up here and pretend you're one of us. We have senators in this room, Beatrice. We have investors. I will not let you ruin Bryce's moment with your instability." "I'm not unstable," I said, keeping my hands clasped loosely in front of me. "And I'm not leaving until I see Bryce." My father materialized at her elbow. Robert Hamilton, aged like a statue, cold, hard, and imposing. He placed a hand on my mother's back, a gesture that looked protective, but was actually about control. He looked at me with a mixture of boredom and disgust. "We paid you off, Beatrice," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We paid for your apartment deposit when you left. We paid for your car insurance that last year. You chose your life. This is our family. You made it very clear you didn't want to be part of it when you walked away from your obligations." "My obligations?" I almost laughed. "You mean when I refused to say I was driving the car that Bryce crashed? That obligation?" "Lower your voice," my mother snapped, gripping her clutch so hard her knuckles turned white. That is exactly why you aren't here. You rewrite history to make yourself the victim. Bryce made a mistake. You tried to destroy him for it. I tried to make him take responsibility. There's a difference. He is a partner at the firm now, my father said, adjusting his cufflinks. He is marrying into the Sterling network well adjacent to it. He is building a legacy. You are working at a non-profit and living in a studio. Don't lecture us on responsibility. You couldn't hack it in the real world, so you came back for attention. It's pathetic. Every word was a precision strike aimed at my insecurities. Pathetic, couldn't hack it, freeloader. It was their favorite narrative. If I was a failure, then their treatment of me was justified. It was tough love. If I was successful, then they were just monsters. Therefore, I had to be a failure. I didn't come for money, I said quietly. Then why are you here? A new voice joined the fray. Bryce. He looked the part of the perfect groom, tall, handsome blonde hair swept back. But up close the cracks showed. His eyes were glassy pupils slightly dilated. He smelled of scotch and Altoids. He adjusted his bow tie, sneering at me. Did the invite get lost in the mail? Oh wait, there wasn't one. Congratulations, Bryce, I said. Save it. He stepped into my personal space, using his height to intimidate. It was a move he'd learned from Dad. You're an embarrassment, B. Samantha's family is here. Do you know who her uncle is? Do you know who's sitting at table 1, the CEO of Sterling Dynamics? Noah Sterling. That's the level we're playing at now. I'm going to be closing deals with him by midnight. I don't need my crazy sister hanging around looking like a charity case. Noah. The name hung in the air between us. Bryce said it with a mix of reverence and hunger. He didn't know the man he was desperate to impress was the same man who made me coffee this morning and kissed my forehead before I left. The irony was so sharp it almost cut. I'm sure you'll make an impression, I said, my expression neutral. I already have, Bryce scoffed. Now get lost, or I'll have security drag you out. And don't think I won't do it. It's my day. They stood there, a united front. The father, the mother, and the golden child. A fortress of dysfunction. My stomach churned. The urge to run was overwhelming. I could just leave. I could go back to my car, call Noah, tell him to meet me at a diner, and forget these people ever existed. Why was I doing this? Why was I subjecting myself to this poison? Because if I ran, the lie won. I'm getting a drink, I said, stepping around Bryce. Beatrice, my mother warned. One drink? I called back over my shoulder. Then I'll go. I walked toward the bar, my legs feeling heavy. I ordered a sparkling water with lime. I needed a clear head and found a quiet corner near a pillar. I took a sip, my hand trembling slightly. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to center myself. You look like you're about to punch someone or throw up. I opened my eyes. Aunt Marcy was standing there holding a glass of Chardonnay. She was my father's younger sister, the black sheep, before I took the title, mostly because she married a carpenter and moved to the other side of town. She looked tired, her dress a few seasons old, but her eyes were kind. I'm leaning toward throwing up, I admitted. Marcy stepped closer, shielding me from the room with her body. She reached out and squeezed my arm. Her hand was warm. I saw them corner you. Vultures. They want me gone, Marcy. Of course they do, she said softly. You're the mirror, honey. When they look at you, they see all the ugly things they did. Nobody likes looking in the mirror. She handed me a napkin. You okay? You're pale. I'm fine. I needed to see it. I needed to know I could stand here and not crumble. You don't have to earn basic decency, Beatrice, Marcy said, echoing a sentiment she'd told me a dozen times over the years. You don't have to prove you're worthy of a seat at the table. You built your own table. I touched my clutch. Inside my phone held the digital archives of my life. The receipts. I had 3 things that could dismantle the Hamilton legacy in about 10 minutes. First, the email chain where my father explicitly threatened to cut off my tuition if I didn't change my major to business. Second, the legal document I refused to sign, an NDA regarding a family financial matter that was essentially fraud. And third, the voicemail. The one Bryce left me the morning after the crash, weeping, admitting he was drunk, begging me to take the fall because Dad says you can handle it. B, you're strong. Please, I can't go to jail. I had kept them not as weapons, but as insurance. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that my memories were real. I could play that voicemail over the DJ's speakers right now. I could email the NDA to the guests. But I wasn't going to. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I didn't want to win by being like them. Thanks, Marcy, I said, taking a steadying breath. I'm okay. Good, she said. Because here comes trouble. I turned. The room was transitioning to cocktail hour. Waiters were circulating with hors d'oeuvres. My mother was moving through the crowd again, and she had spotted me talking to Marcy. She flagged down a server, whispered something, and pointed in my direction. The server looked uncomfortable but nodded. Simultaneously, Bryce was holding court near the center of the room, loudly recounting a story that was definitely exaggerated. He saw me too. He saw that I hadn't left. The server approached me. Miss, I'm sorry, but I've been asked to escort you out. By whom? I asked loudly. The host. I am the groom's sister, I said, my voice carrying over the low hum of conversation. I am drinking water. I am standing still. Is there a problem? People nearby stopped talking. Heads turned. This was it. The public shaming. My mother swooped in, feigning concern, but speaking loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear. Beatrice, honey, please. You're making a scene. We talked about this. When you're feeling like this, it's better to be at home. Like what, mother? I asked, holding my ground. Existing. Bryce pushed through the small circle that had formed. She's not invited, he announced, throwing his hands up. Seriously, can we get some security? She's crashing my wedding. The murmur went through the room like a wave. Crashing. Uninvited. Unstable. The guests stared. I felt the heat rise up my neck, the burning sensation of 100 pairs of eyes judging me. I saw Samantha, the bride, standing near the cake, looking mortified but saying nothing. She was complicit. She knew the truth. I had tried to warn her once, and she had politely told me that families are complicated. Bryce laughed, a cruel barking sound. God, you're desperate. Just go be. Nobody wants you here. I looked at him. Really looked at him. I saw the fear behind his eyes. He was terrified that I would speak. He was terrified that the curated image of the successful self-made man would shatter if I pulled the loose thread. I'm not the one who should be embarrassed, Bryce, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the sudden silence of the room, it landed like a stone. I'm not the one pretending to be something I'm not. Get her out, Bryce yelled, losing his composure. He pointed a shaking finger at the door. And then the energy in the room shifted. It wasn't a sound. It was a change in atmospheric pressure. The double doors at the far end of the ballroom opened, and a hush fell over the back of the room that rippled forward. Noah entered. He wasn't wearing the hoodie I was used to. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, a white shirt crisp enough to cut glass and no tie. He walked with a kind of easy, predatory grace that commanded attention without asking for it. He didn't look like a guest. He looked like he owned the building. Flanking him were two associates, but he waved them off. He scanned the room. His face was impassive, the mask of the CEO who made billion-dollar decisions before breakfast. He looked over the heads of the staring guests, over the terrified staff, over my sputtering brother. His eyes found mine. For a second, the mask slipped. Just a fraction. A flicker of concern followed immediately by a hardening of his jaw. He saw me standing alone in the circle of judgment. He saw my mother's fake pity. He saw Bryce's red-faced aggression. He started walking. He didn't rush. He moved through the crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea. People stepped back, whispering, "Is that him? Is that Sterling?" Bryce, sensing an opportunity to pivot from his tantrum to sycophancy, smoothed his jacket and stepped into Noah's path. "Mr. Sterling!" Bryce boomed, his voice changing instantly from bully to bootlicker. "So glad you could make it. I was just sorry about the disturbance. We have a bit of a family situation. My sister, she's not well. We were just handling it. Noah stopped. He looked at Bryce. He didn't extend his hand. He didn't smile. He just looked at him with a terrifying neutrality. Handling it, Noah repeated. His voice was low, smooth, and dangerous. Yes, exactly. Bryce laughed nervously, sweating. You know how it is. Every family has that one person, right? Actually, I've been meaning to connect with you. I'm doing great things with the logistics division at my firm. I practically run the supply chain department. I think there's a lot of synergy between what I do and Sterling Dynamics. It was the fatal mistake, the lie. Bryce didn't run anything. He was a junior associate who got the job because my father played golf with the hiring manager, and he was bragging about getting rid of me to the man who loved me. My father joined them, sensing the power dynamic. Robert Hamilton, he said, extending a hand. It's an honor, Noah. I apologize for the display. Beatrice can be difficult. We're having her removed so we can focus on the celebration. Noah looked at my father's hand, then at his face. He didn't shake it. He kept his hands at his sides. He turned his gaze back to Bryce. You run the supply chain department, Noah asked. Basically. Bryce lied, puffing out his chest. I'm the guy they call when things get messy. I see, Noah said. And this, he gestured vaguely toward me, is how you handle things when they get messy. She's a trespasser, Bryce scoffed. She doesn't belong here. Noah stood in silence for a long moment. He seemed to be collecting data, archiving every word, every sneer, every lie. He looked at the security guard who was hovering uncertainly. He looked at the guests who were drinking in the drama. Then he looked at me again. He didn't rush to my side to save me. He didn't punch Bryce. He respected me too much for that. He knew I needed to stand on my own feet. But he gave me a look that communicated everything. I see them. I see you. Say the word. I held his gaze. I felt the shame evaporate, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They thought they had buried me. They thought they were shaming the outcast. But they had just handed the executioner a loaded gun. I think, Noah said, turning back to Bryce with a calm that was far more terrifying than anger, that I have seen enough. Right, Bryce chuckled, misreading the room entirely. Let's get a drink. I have some ideas about your Q3 projections I'd love to pitch. Noah didn't answer. He walked past Bryce, past my father, and stopped 3 feet away from me. He didn't touch me, not yet, but he stood in a way that put him between me and the rest of the room. He turned to face them, creating a unified front. My mother looked confused. Mr. Sterling, do you know Beatrice? I looked at my mother. I looked at Bryce, whose confident smirk was starting to falter as the gears in his head tried to grind out an explanation. They don't know, I said softly to Noah. Noah looked at me, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. No, he said. They don't. I turned to face the room. My heart wasn't hammering anymore. It was beating a slow, steady rhythm of war. They didn't know who I was anymore. And they definitely didn't know who was about to stand beside me. You wanted me to leave, Bryce, I asked. I told you to get out, he spat, though he looked uncertain now, glancing between me and the billionaire standing suspiciously close to his rejected sister. I'll leave, I said, but not before I finish my drink. I took a sip of my water, staring him down. The trap was set. They just had to step into it. The transition to the toasts was a masterclass in denial. My mother, ever the stage manager, signaled the band to cut the volume. She practically glided to the microphone stand in the center of the dance floor, a champagne flute raised like a scepter. The guests relieved to have a focal point that wasn't the tension radiating from the corner where I stood with Noah turned their chairs. Bryce stood by the head table, sweating through his tuxedo, his eyes darting toward us every few seconds. He looked like a man waiting for a bomb squad to cut the red wire. Noah didn't move. He stood beside me, his presence a physical anchor. He didn't hold my hand that would have looked like he was propping me up. Instead, He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching my family with the detached curiosity of an anthropologist observing a cannibalistic ritual. "Family," my mother began, her voice amplified and smooth as silk. "It is the bedrock of everything we do. When I look at Bryce and Samantha, I see two people who understand the meaning of sacrifice, who understand that sometimes you have to put the greater good above your own selfish desires." I felt the rage spark in my chest, hot and sharp. She was using the very weapon they had used to bludgeon me, sacrifice, to praise the son who had sacrificed nothing. "Bryce," she continued, turning to him with a beatific smile, "you have always been the protector, the steady hand. You carry the Hamilton name with such integrity, and tonight we celebrate the union of two dynasties." She raised her glass higher. "To loyalty, to truth, and to the family we build." "To the family we build," the room echoed. I started to step forward. I didn't have a plan, just a need to stop the flow of lies before I choked on them. But Noah moved first. He didn't shout. He didn't storm the stage. He simply walked into the center of the room as the applause died down. He moved with such absolute authority that the silence spread outward from him like a ripple in a pond. My mother lowered her glass, her smile faltering. "Mr. Sterling," she said into the mic, a nervous laugh bubbling up. "We weren't expecting a toast from the VIP table, but—" "I'm not toasting," Noah said. He didn't need a microphone. His voice, trained in boardrooms where billions of dollars moved on his command, carried to the back of the hall. "I'm correcting the record." My father stood up at the head table. "Noah, this really isn't the time." "Sit down, Robert," Noah said. He didn't look at my father. He looked at the guests. "My name is Noah Sterling. I am the CEO of Sterling Dynamics. Many of you know my company. Some of you, like Bryce, claim to work closely with me." Bryce went pale, a sickly gray kind of pale that clashed with his spray tan. "I am here tonight for one reason," Noah continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "I am here to support my partner." He turned and extended a hand toward me. The room gasped. It wasn't a metaphorical gasp. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the ballroom. I saw Samantha's jaw drop. I saw my mother freeze, the microphone dipping in her hand. I saw the realization hit the important guests at the front tables, the senators, the investors. They looked from Noah to me, the unstable sister, and the math began to reconfigure in their heads at lightning speed. I walked toward him. I didn't rush. I walked past the table where my cousins sat, past the aunt who had ignored me for 3 years, past the high school friends who had deleted my number. I took Noah's hand, but I didn't hide behind him. I stepped up to the microphone my mother was still clutching. She looked at me with genuine fear. "Beatrice, don't," she whispered off mic. "We can fix this. We can talk about money." I took the microphone from her hand. "I don't want your money, Mother." I turned to the room. The lights were bright, blindingly so, but I could see the faces in the gloom. "My mother talks about truth," I said into the mic. My voice shook once, then steadied. "She talks about integrity, so let's have some. You've all been told I'm not here because I'm unstable. You've been told I'm difficult because I left the family." I looked at Bryce. He was gripping the tablecloth, his knuckles white. 3 years ago, on the night of November 14th, my brother Bryce crashed our father's vintage Mercedes into a utility pole on Route 9. He was drunk. He was 3 times the legal limit. "Liar!" Bryce shouted, standing up. "She's lying. She's crazy." "Sit down, Bryce," I said. It wasn't a scream. It was a command. And to everyone's shock, including mine, he slumped back into his chair. "My parents arrived at the scene before the police," I continued. "They didn't ask if he was hurt. They asked me to switch seats. They wanted me to tell the officers I was driving. They wanted me to take the DUI, the criminal record, and the public shame so that Bryce's internship wouldn't be affected. They offered to pay off my student loans if I did it. And when I refused, when I said I wouldn't start my life with a lie, they cut me out." "This is absurd," my father boomed, trying to regain control of the room. She is having an episode. Security. I have the voicemail, I said. I pulled my phone from my clutch. I had transferred the file to a clean audio note just for this moment. I held the phone's speaker up to the microphone. The room was deadly silent. The only sound was the hum of the speakers. I pressed play. B, pick up, please. It was Bryce's voice, slurred, weeping, hysterical. I messed up. I messed up bad. You have to help me. Dad says you can take the heat. You're strong, B. I can't go to jail. I can't lose this job. Please just tell them you were driving. I'll owe you forever. Just be the sister I need, okay? Don't let me drown. I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It hung over the room like a shroud. I looked at Samantha the bride. She wasn't looking at Bryce. She was looking at the table, her face drained of color. She was realizing exactly what kind of family she had just legally bound herself to. I didn't play that to hurt you, Bryce, I said, looking at him. I played it because I'm done letting you tell people I'm the one who broke this family. You broke it when you decided my future was less valuable than your reputation. I turned to my parents. They looked small. My father, stripped of his bluster, looked like an old man caught in a lie. My mother looked like a porcelain doll that had been dropped on concrete. You don't get to erase me, I said to them. And you don't get to use my name as a cautionary tale to make yourselves look noble. Family isn't blood when blood is used like a chain. I am not your scapegoat anymore. I scanned the room, finding Aunt Marcy in the back. She was crying quietly, a hand over her mouth, nodding at me. There are good people in this room, I said. People who treated me like a human being when I had nothing to offer them. Thank you. As for the rest of you, enjoy the cake. I handed the microphone back to my mother. She didn't take it. It clattered to the floor, a loud, jarring thud that made half the room flinch. I turned to leave. I had said what I needed to say. I felt light, weightless, as if a coat of lead had fallen off my shoulders. Beatrice. Noah's voice stopped me. He wasn't following me out. He was standing his ground. He turned to me, ignoring the chaos, ignoring the whispers, ignoring the 300 people staring at us. You said family isn't blood. Noah said, his voice soft but projected clearly in the stunned room. You're right. It's choice. He reached into his jacket pocket. My breath hitched. Noah, not here. Not like this. Exactly here, he said. Because I want them to see it. I want them to see that you aren't the one who was left behind. You're the one who is moving forward. He didn't kneel. That would have been theatrical, and Noah hated theatrics. Instead, he took my hand and held it in both of his. He looked at me with an intensity that made the rest of the room dissolve into gray static. I have watched you build a life from scratch, he said. I have watched you handle grace with a dignity these people couldn't buy with all the money in this room. I don't want to save you, Beatrice. You saved yourself a long time ago. I want to build with you. I want to build a table where you never have to beg for a seat. I want to build a home where the truth is the foundation, not the enemy. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, a solitaire diamond that caught the light like a trapped star. It wasn't flashy, it was solid, it was real. Will you marry me? I looked at the ring, then I looked at my parents. My mother was clutching my father's arm, her eyes wide with shock. They were seeing the wealth, the status, the sterling connection, everything they worshipped being offered to the daughter they had thrown away. And they realized in that moment that they couldn't touch it. They couldn't claim it. I looked back at Noah. Yes, I said. He slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. He pulled me in, kissing me, not for the audience, but for us. For a moment, I forgot where we were. I forgot the smell of the white roses and the judgment of the country club set. I just felt safe. As we pulled apart, the reality of the room crashed back in. She's confused, my mother shrieked, her voice cracking desperation clawing its way out. She stepped toward us, her hands fluttering. "Noah, Mr. Sterling, please. Beatrice is... She's emotional. She doesn't mean what she said. We're a close family. We love her. This is just a misunderstanding." It was pathetic. It was the final desperate attempt to spin the narrative to pull the tablecloth over the stain. I didn't argue. I didn't scream back. I simply looked at her. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me, the woman who had chosen her social standing over my integrity every single time. And for the first time in my life, I didn't see a giant. I didn't see a monster. I just seen a sad, frightened woman in an expensive dress, terrified of being exposed. "I'm not confused, Elaine," I said using her first name. It hit her like a slap. "I've never been clearer." I took Noah's arm. "Let's go." We walked toward the exit. The crowd parted for us instantly. No one tried to stop us. No one dared. I could feel their eyes on my back, but they didn't burn anymore. I wasn't walking away in shame. I was walking away with the prize they had all been chasing, leaving them with nothing but their cold champagne and the echoing silence of the truth. Walking away from the wreckage of my family's reputation felt like walking through a minefield that had already detonated. The explosion was over. The dust was settling, and all that was left was the ringing in my ears. The silence in the ballroom had fractured into 1,000 urgent, hushed conversations. I could hear the distinct insect-like buzz of gossip swarming the room. The guests, previously united in their adoration of the Hamilton legacy, were now visibly recoiling. I saw a state senator lean over to his aide and whisper something while pointing at his watch, clearly plotting an early exit. The facade hadn't just cracked. It had shattered, exposing the rotting wood underneath. We made it halfway to the double doors before the shock wore off and the consequences kicked in. The first casualty was Samantha. We had to pass the head table to leave, and she was still sitting there frozen. Her bouquet lay on the table like a dead thing. She looked at me as I approached, her eyes wide and rimmed with red. She looked at Bryce, who was currently chugging a glass of wine with shaking hands, and then she looked back at me. It wasn't hatred in her eyes. It was horror. She was realizing that the man she had just married was a liar, and the family she had joined was a shark tank. "I didn't know," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible. "Beatrice, I swear. He told me you were... He said you were dangerous." I stopped for a second. I felt a pang of sympathy, but it was distant. "He lied to you, Sam. About the car, about his job, about me. You have to decide if you can live with the rest of the lies he hasn't told you yet." I didn't wait for an answer. I kept walking, Noah's hand warm and steady on the small of my back. But the Hamiltons weren't going to let us leave without a fight. Desperation makes people stupid, and my father was a desperate man. He intercepted us 10 feet from the exit, moving with a speed I hadn't seen in years. He didn't look at me. He locked his eyes on Noah, his face a mask of frantic negotiation. "Noah, wait," my father said, breathless, stepping in front of us. He put on his closer smile, the one he used when a deal was going south, but it looked ghastly under the ballroom lights. "Let's not be hasty. Emotions are running high. I understand Beatrice is upset, but there's no need to let a domestic squabble impact business potential." Noah stopped. He looked at my father with an expression of mild distaste, like he'd found a stain on his cuff. "Business potential." "Exactly." My father pressed, sensing a crack in the door. He's young. He made a mistake years ago, but his work at his firm is solid. We have connections. The Hamilton network is valuable to Sterling Dynamics. We can sit down, have a scotch, and work out a clearer understanding. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that benefits everyone." It was breathtaking. Even now, with his son exposed as a criminal and his daughter estranged, Robert Hamilton was trying to close the deal. He thought he could trade my dignity for a seat at Noah's table. Noah didn't blink. "Mr. Hamilton, let me be very clear so there is no confusion later. I don't do business with liars, and I don't partner with men who sell out their children to save face." "Now see here," my father blustered, his face reddening. Any existing contracts between Sterling Dynamics and your associates will be reviewed by my legal team first thing Monday morning. Noah continued, his voice freezing the air around us. If we find any irregularities, and I suspect we will terminate them. We will address any business matters through proper legal channels. But tonight is personal. You don't have a business partner here, Robert. You have a man who is disgusted by you. My father recoiled as if he'd been physically struck. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The power dynamic had shifted permanently, and he knew it. "You bitch!" The shout came from behind us. Bryce came charging through the crowd, his face twisted into a snarl of pure alcoholic rage. He shoved past a waiter, knocking a tray of glasses to the floor with a deafening crash. He didn't care about the senator anymore. He didn't care about the investors. The mask was gone. This was the real Bryce, the insecure, vicious boy who burned ants with a magnifying glass. "You ruined it!" Bryce screamed, lunging toward me. "You jealous, miserable bitch! You couldn't stand that I was winning. You had to come here and wreck everything because you're a failure." Noah stepped forward, his body tensing, ready to intercept him. But I put a hand on Noah's chest to hold him back. I didn't need a bodyguard for Bryce. I took a step toward my brother. He stopped, surprised by my advance. He was used to me retreating. He was used to me crying. "I didn't ruin anything, Bryce," I said, my voice cutting through his hysteria. "I just turned on the lights. If the room is ugly, that's your fault, not mine." "You're dead to us." He spat spittle flying from his lips. "You hear me? You're nothing." "I know," I said calmly. "And that's why you can't hurt me anymore." Then came the finale. My mother pushed past Bryce, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't the quiet tears of heartbreak. They were the loud, gasping sobs of a woman who needed the audience to see her suffering. She reached for my hands, her grip icy and desperate. "Beatrice, how can you do this?" she wailed. "We gave you everything: private schools, dance lessons, cars. We sacrificed everything for this family, and you throw it in our faces. Why do you hate us so much?" I looked down at her hands, clutching mine. I remembered the dance lessons I didn't want. I remembered the car I wasn't allowed to drive unless I got straight A's. I remembered the sacrifice that always came with an invoice. I pulled my hands away, gently but firmly. "You didn't give me everything, Mom," I said. "You gave me things, and then you sent me the bill. You taught me that love was a transaction. You taught me that I was only valuable if I was useful to the brand." "That's not true," she cried, looking around at the guests, begging them to believe her. "We loved you." "You loved the version of me that complied," I corrected her. "You loved the prop. But the daughter, you left her in a police station parking lot 3 years ago to save your son's career." I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the expensive flowers and the stale air of judgment, and then I let it out. "I'm done paying the price for your conditional love," I said. "I'm defaulting on the loan, Mom. I'm free." I turned back to Noah. He nodded once. It was a nod of respect. "Let's go home," I said. We walked through the final set of doors, leaving the ballroom behind. The heavy wood clicked shut, muffling the sounds of my mother's sobbing and my brother's shouting. It was like stepping out of a submarine that had been crushing me for 20 years. The night air was cool and smelled of the ocean. The valet saw us coming and scrambled to get Noah's car. I stood on the curb, my legs feeling a little shaky now that the adrenaline was fading, but my spine felt steel straight. I looked back at the hotel one last time. Through the glass windows, I could see the silhouette of the party churning in chaos. I saw Samantha standing alone. I saw my father slumped in a chair. It looked like a terrarium of poisonous things, and I was on the outside looking in. I wasn't fleeing. I wasn't running away to hide. I was simply leaving a place where I no longer lived. Noah's car pulled up. He opened the door for me. I slid into the leather seat, and as he closed the door, the sound was the most satisfying thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of a chapter ending. It was the sound of a lock turning. 3 months later, the silence in my life felt different. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of exclusion anymore. It was the peaceful, rhythmic silence of a life that finally belonged to me. The dust had settled, not because the debris was gone, but because I had stopped trying to glue the pieces back together. I was sitting on the back porch of the house Noah and I had bought, not a mansion, but a restored farmhouse, with a creaky porch swing and enough land for a garden. It was Sunday. Noah was inside making coffee, the smell drifting through the screen door. The fallout had been messy, of course. Gossip in our town has a half-life of 1,000 years, and the Red Wedding, as the locals called it, was still a hot topic. I heard through the grapevine that Bryce's position at the firm had been quietly restructured to a role with no actual power. Samantha had separated from him 2 weeks after the honeymoon. But I didn't celebrate those things. I didn't track their failures. I realized that keeping score was just another way of staying attached to them. Instead, I focused on who stayed. Aunt Marcy drove up every other weekend. We didn't talk about my parents. We drank tea, she helped me plant tomatoes, and we talked about books. 2 of my cousins, the ones who had been too afraid to speak up that night, had reached out. We were slowly, tentatively building a bridge. It wasn't the whole clan, and it never would be again, but it was real. I had also made a decision about my own legacy. With the stability Noah provided and the success of my own career, now that I wasn't drowning in stress, I started a scholarship fund for students who had aged out of the foster system. I wanted to help people who had to build a future without a safety net. It wasn't about flashing wealth or getting my name on a plaque. It was about ensuring that the next difficult kid had a fighting chance. My phone buzzed on the patio table. It was a number I had blocked, but voicemail still came through. Then a text from a burner number. It was my mother. "Why are you doing this to us? People are talking. Your father is depressed. We just want to be a family again. Please, Beatrice, stop punishing us." I stared at the screen. Even now, after everything, she saw my freedom as a punishment to her. She didn't miss her daughter. She missed her scapegoat. She missed the container where she poured all the family's dysfunction so the rest of them could stay clean. I didn't feel angry. I just felt a profound, exhausting pity. I typed a reply, my fingers steady. "I'm not doing anything to you. I'm finally doing something for me. Goodbye, Mom." I blocked the number. Noah stepped out onto the porch, handing me a mug. He saw the phone in my hand, saw the set of my jaw, and he knew. He didn't ask. He just sat down next to me, his shoulder pressing warmly against mine. He didn't try to fix it. He just stayed. I looked down at the engagement ring on my finger. For a long time, I thought marriage was a trap, a way to lock someone into a role they couldn't escape. I thought family was a debt you paid until you died. But looking at the stone catching the morning sun, I didn't feel trapped. I felt seen. I took a sip of coffee and looked out at the tree line, breathing in the clean, cold air. My parents had tried to bury me in shame, thinking the weight of it would crush me into compliance. They didn't realize that pressure creates diamonds. Some families break you to keep you close. Mine broke me and accidentally set me free. And that finally is where Beatrice found her peace. Not in revenge, but in choosing her own path and building her own bedrock. What did you think of Beatrice's decision to reveal the truth at the wedding? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single comment of your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dive narratives. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.